Hello there, Alaskans, wherever you are. Welcome to the Must Read Alaska Show, coming to you from somewhere in Alaska. This is the place where we talk about, you guessed it, Alaska, where we keep the mainstream media on their toes and where we are standing up for what's right in a world run by leftists. You can find out more by heading over to mustreadalaska.com and also checking out the Must Read Alaska YouTube channel for some really great content. But first, let's get this party started.
Thank you, Scott. Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome aboard Must Read Alaska, coming to you from somewhere in Alaska. And we have a great show for you today. Before we get started, though, if you like this podcast, if you love freedom, and if you love the Constitution like we do, then give us a 5-star review. And if you have the time, why not write a comment? We want to hear from you. And your feedback just makes us better. So if you can, do that. And also hit the donate button at mustreadalaska.com, because we're reader-driven and listener-driven, and we're a conservative project about Alaska for Alaskans. And if you're on Facebook, give us a like. By the way, we just reached 15,000 followers on Facebook. We're pretty happy about that. And I want to thank John for all his hard work in making that happen. It's a big milestone. I'm Suzanne Downing, and you know my co-host, John Quick. He's on the other mic in Nikiski. He keeps us current on everything going on in Kenai. Scott Levesque is our producer in Anchorage. You can hear Scott on the Wednesday edition of the Must Read Alaska show, which he's hosting by himself. Great show on Wednesday, last Wednesday, Scott. Really good job. We've got a lot going on. It's 12 degrees in Fairbanks. It's 36 degrees in Juneau. There's wind shear at the Anchorage Ted Stevens International Airport. And I was just watching the planes doing the laps and flapping their wings as they're trying to land. So I understand it's raining in Kenai. John, what else is going on down there?
Well, thanks so much, Suzanne. John Quick here, and it is raining in Kenai. I spent the morning at the hardware store, tootling around, and just made it home. And we had a great Christmas here on the Kenai. Businesses are open, restaurants are open, small businesses are open, and this is a prime example of a scenario where you don't have to live under tyranny. You can actually be an American on the Kenai Peninsula and make money and have your doors open. And the government does not want to shut you down. In fact, our Mayor Charlie Pierce, wants your business to be open. He wants it to be successful. And it's just a great place to live. We get all these inklings of our hospitals are full, What are we going to do? Well, I unfortunately had a family member get taken in an ambulance over the holiday season. And she went to the ER and she's fine now, but the hospital was empty. Nobody's in the hospital. Literally nobody was in the ER. It was not overrun. So these things that we're hearing about, the hospitals can't take it and this and that, it's just not true. And so on the Kenai, we are living the American dream. It's a little slower than normal, but everything is open and we love it here on the Kenai.
Well, and on that note, I want to ask everybody to check out the Must Read Alaska YouTube channel, where we've posted a really great video interview of Ken Castner, the mayor of Homer. And of course, Homer is a city inside the Kenai borough. And a young sophomore high school student from Los Angeles just called him up and interviewed him on YouTube. And it's a really, really great interview. But Ken Castner says the same thing, which is, the Kenai is doing pretty well. It's just and Homer's done well, and people are trying to cut each other a lot of slack in the Kenai Peninsula. So good job there. So today we have a really special guest with us on the show. If he hasn't fallen asleep on us while we've been talking about the magnificent weather on the Kenai, Jay McDonald. He's a political strategist who's been working on the campaign of Representative Lance Pruitt, and he is here to explain to us what went down in District 27 in the race that should have all Alaskans concerned about our elections. Now, I've known Jay for several years, and he is an amazing researcher, and he's, dare I say, a very intense individual. First, Jay, welcome to the show.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, it's really, really good of you to spend some time with us this afternoon. We want to talk to you. We want to hear from you, actually, about what happened in the district. First of all, District 27 race, part of it is in court, and they had their hearing last week in front of a judge. And I wanted you to just walk us through what happened with how they moved around these voting locations in the district just before election day. Can you kind of tell our listeners what exactly happened?
Yeah, absolutely. So, to begin with, there was a number of different issues that we wanted to evaluate in a courtroom setting. We wanted to put the evidence out there and have a serious conversation on the merits about a number of different things. And unfortunately, at the very beginning, the judge ruled on procedural grounds to basically dismiss all arguments, and we were only really allowed to discuss the polling place location issue in detail. So we wanted to talk about the data hacking issue that happened. We wanted to talk about the signature lawsuit, and we wanted to talk about some illegal votes that were cast. And all of those arguments were more or less shut down. We were really only able to talk about the polling location, and that was a little bit limited as well. And part of the reason why it was so disappointing was because we didn't make all of this stuff up. This has happened before in Alaska. We were going off of a precedent in 1988. There was a case, Finkelstein versus Stout, which was a very similar set of circumstances where a Democrat sued the state of Alaska, and the courts determined that the will of the voters was not clear, and they ordered a new election.
Well, this sounds really important, but let's talk about the part that she did take up and she did hear. Let's go over that one first, and then I want to get to these other ones because they're kind of the meat of the issue today, which is the data hacking, the signatures, the illegal votes, all of this stuff that happened in District 27. It happened in other districts too, you know that, but you've got proof in District 27. But first of all, 2 days before the election, the division elections just moved one of the voting locations. Tell us what happened with that.
Yeah, well, so actually, I'll start by talking about, the race was. This is a race where there was over 9,000 ballots that were cast, and the difference we're talking, the margin of victory is 11 votes. It's a fraction of a percent. So, making the case for Lance Pruitt, we had Randy Rudrick presenting evidence. And if you don't know Randy, whether you like him or whether you don't like him, whether you're conservative or whether you're a leftist, there's nobody that could dispute the fact that Randy is one of the foremost experts in the state. So, his testimony might be a little bit skewed from his perspective, but the man is accurate. He's drawn the maps. He's drawn the actual precinct maps, and there's nobody who knows more about electoral details than Randy does. And, after his testimony, the points that he was laying out, it's a fact that in this specific precinct that the state moved without notifying voters multiple times, the election day turnout was lower than it should have been. It was suppressed. And as we all know, the turnout was 2-1 in favor of Republicans on election day.
Yeah, especially in that particular precinct. It was District 27 precinct. What was the number on that precinct?
915.
915. And so that's the one that used to be at Wayland Baptist Church. And then before the primary, Wayland said, we really don't want you guys to have your election here this time because of COVID. So they moved it to Muldoon Town Center for the primary. And then all the way up until 2 days before the general election, it was at Muldoon Town Center. Everybody thought it was there.
Yeah, so apparently the people at the tippy top in the division of elections knew that it was going to be moving. They weren't able to give us any kind of loud communications where they made that decision, and we weren't able to really nail down exactly when or how that happened or what the decision-making process was because they didn't have those logs. They told us none of those conversations were recorded. But the bottom line is the people working in the polling place found out the Sunday before the election. That's like 2 days out. Yeah. The people who owned the buildings did not even know what was happening inside of the buildings that they own. They didn't even notify the owners of the buildings.
Yeah.
So it's incredible. Yeah.
So at first the judge just said, no, I'm not going to, we're not going to consider this. She wasn't going to put a, some sort of an emergency order on it. And then when she heard the evidence, she reversed herself. How did that happen?
Yeah. So first off, I'd like to say when you're talking about dismissing arguments on procedural grounds, there is no set clear procedure for bringing this type of case forward. And there's a number of different procedural tools that a judge can use to throw out a case without even considering the merits. And, that's one of the reasons why it was so disappointing, because no matter what the circumstances are, they can either say, well, you can't prove standing, or, latches, or this or that. They can always come up with a reason not to hear it and not to evaluate the case on the merits. Yes, I mean, there's a little bit disappointing with, what they did with the other arguments. But as far as the polling place location, that's the one that it's the most difficult for the court to throw that out outright, because there are statutory obligations for the Division of Elections. They can't just do whatever they want. They're supposed to follow laws that are written by the legislature that define exactly how this moving the polling place process is conducted, and they did not follow any of those guidelines.
Yeah, it didn't look particularly strong for them when they were in court under the questioning last week. It didn't look real good for them, but we understand that the judge will come up with some sort of an order tomorrow. That would be Tuesday. And so we're waiting to hear how she will rule on that. But in the meantime, there were other things that she just wouldn't take up on these procedural grounds. And I want to go over them with you as well. For instance, there were people who were voting in the district who apparently don't live in the district. And apparently there were enough of them doing that it was significant. And they all voted absentees, and probably most of those were Democrat votes. So would have been for Liz Snyder instead of Lance Pruitt. You did some research on this. Walk us through that.
Yeah. So, after the election, we took a look at things. Well, I took a look at things, and there was some really suspicious activity when you look at the way that the absentee program was conducted. So basically, this year, there was 99.63% of the absentee ballots that were cast by mail were accepted. That's never happened before. Not in Alaska, not anywhere that I looked at. And there's reasons why there's security measures in place and those things are screened, because there are a decent number of the ballots that are not legally cast. So when I saw that number, and I realized, like, there's no signature verification on these. They removed the witness signature requirement. Like, what is going on here? We had an unprecedented number of ballots that were cast this way. And this is the first time in ever that they've all been accepted almost. Virtually none of them were thrown out for any other reason than postmark date. And, it's typically in this district, even the lax security measures that we had before, they would be throwing out between 3 and 4%. So what I did was I took a look at a small sample of homes, about 170 houses that had been sold within like a 10-month time period leading up to the election. And I looked at the property tax records, and I saw if the owner changed. I checked to see if they had voted in the district. And so out of that 170 homes, I ended up coming up with about 3 dozen different people that had moved. In some cases, back in January, people moved out of Alaska, sold their home. They put their follow-up address on their deed, which is a notarized document. It's basically an affidavit. It's a signed, notarized legal document that is a matter of public record, saying that they moved out of Alaska and that they sold their home in Alaska and they moved to another state. And then they voted in October by mail using that out-of-state address.
Oh.
Like, this is somebody that, and this happened in a number of different cases. They sell their home, move out of Alaska. They've got no interest in Alaska anymore. They've been living out of state since, January, February timeframe in some cases. And these are just the ones that I looked at. I could have went further back, and I probably would have found the same thing.
So Jay, Jim, let me just summarize just for the folks that are listening, because I think that that this is super important. So just imagine, if you're listening, just imagine yourself that if you're a single mom or a single dad, you come home from work, you feed your kids, you put all your kids in your minivan, and you head to the polling station. and that polling station has changed and you have no idea, you're probably just going to head home. And that's a big deal. And then to Jay's second point is that there's literally people that live in Texas or wherever because they sold their property and moved out of Alaska, and they voted in this election. And you have proof of that. And the judge would not take the case. Why would they not take this case?
So, and I want to be a little bit clear on something. So this isn't just specifically about this one judge. There have been a number of cases recently where consistently judges are unwilling to consider any sort of enforcement of, because the laws are already on the books. They're unwilling to consider any arguments about the residency or the legality of these votes. And for whatever reason, they don't want to do it. But because they have that attitude, the laws are so loose in Alaska. I don't recommend anybody do this, obviously, because it is technically illegal. But any person anywhere in the United States could just submit an application to the Division of Elections citing any residents as their residents, and then they can vote there. And there's no challenging it. It's just, if you put that on the application, that's what it is. If I wanted to vote in Fairbanks, and I don't do this, I vote legally, but I could just send them a registration form saying that I live in, just any random address in Fairbanks, and then they would have that ballot cast at that location, even if I had it mailed to my real home address in Anchorage. So it's not just an abstract concept. There's a lot of people that are doing this.
Well, yeah. And in fact, our producer, Scott Lebeck, wrote about this very situation with one of the staffers for Liz Snyder. She was one of her campaign staffer, who used to live in the district. And I don't know if you're familiar with this particular case. Maybe she's one of the people that you're familiar with. I think her name is Emily. And she was even receiving paychecks out of the district in her new location. But she actually voted in District 27 as though she still lived there, which technically is illegal. And we certainly wrote about this. Scott did a great job back in November writing about this, because it happened even before the election. You've got people outside the district voting in it, and here's proof.
Yeah, and that was like, there's two of the particular ones struck me as being really over the top. That was one of them. So, she's paid campaign staff for Liz Snyder, voted illegally in that election, and we can say that she voted illegally. And I'm not even going to bother with the alleged thing, because she notes it on the APOC filings. Like, they even put her real address on the APOC filings. And and that's something I'm hoping that we get a chance to argue that point in January, because to be honest, no matter which side won or lost in this case, it's going to the Supreme Court as long as they agree to hear it. But that's something that sort of activity is strikingly similar to the things that Gabrielle Ledoux, for example, is being criminally charged with. Like, if I was on her legal team, I'd be taking a close look at how the lawyers or how the judges are responding to Lance Pruitt's case, because if they can go and say that it's totally fine for Liz Snyder to do the same thing that Gabrielle Ledoux is being criminally charged with, it kind of makes me wonder if Gabrielle Ledoux is getting equal treatment under the law.
Okay, that's a really good point. And the one thing that separates that out is that there are text messages from Gabrielle Ledoux pressing individuals to vote in the district, even if they didn't seem to live there. Even if they said they didn't live there, she still texted them, said, we need you to vote. And so that was more of an activist role that she had, as opposed to being, passively, maybe she knew, maybe she didn't know. And so we don't know what Liz Snyder knew or when she knew it, but it is obvious that you've got detailed records.
I would say that's correct, except Liz Snyder is the person that filled out and filed the APOC reports that say clearly that she does know that person who's voting for her does not live in her district, because she's paying her money and she's sending that check to, I think it's House District 22 is the address that she moved to. So like, she's fully aware that this person voted for her, that she lives outside the district, It's her paid campaign staffer, and she noted it on legal documents that she filed with the state of Alaska.
Yeah, and I think this actual worker lives in District 19, if I'm not mistaken. So this is really a fascinating piece that wasn't accepted by this particular judge, Josie Garden, because on some sort of technical procedural grounds, which you got to wonder what that is, because she hasn't actually said why she wouldn't take. She hasn't actually come up with a reason why she will write her filing on that later, I guess.
Yeah, and so something that's really important to mention too, even if we did argue that on the merits, nobody is saying that anybody should be disenfranchised and shouldn't be allowed to vote. However, if somebody sells their home in January and moves to California and then votes in October in the Alaskan election, at a minimum, it shouldn't be a full count ballot. It should be maybe statewide. Like they shouldn't be voting in local elections for local seats that they have no interest in, and they don't have no legal interest or personal interest. They don't have any stake in these local elections. That should be a statewide ballot. And that's actually how, the people who are honest on their registrations, that's how their ballot is treated that way. So we're really just asking for the law as written to be enforced as written.
And so you talked to actual voters who said that they didn't want to vote that ballot, but it's the one that was sent to them, so they voted it. And that they knew that they lived in a different district, but they went ahead and voted anyway. And you've actually talked to people who have done this.
Yeah, there's a little bit of inconsistency there, and there's some people too, like there's always confusion when you look at the people who cast Q ballots, like on election day. You hear some really interesting feedback too, and some of those things I wanted to talk about when we got around to talking about the election info hack.
Yeah,
I'll tell you.
About that.
Yeah, if we can talk about that now.
Yeah, let's jump into that. So if our listeners don't know about this, you're going to have to fill them in on exactly what happened. Not that you would know, because the FBI probably is the only one who knows, but there was a major hack of our election system, and data was scraped from all the data from our voters was scraped by a foreign government of some sort. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so with that case, there's a lot of misinformation out there around what happened with this hack. And unfortunately, a lot of that misinformation is coming directly from the state of Alaska. When you look at the letter that they were sending people, it had a bunch of lines on there saying that there's no way that the information could have been used in any way in the election, and it had no impact on the results, and all these other statements of fact that they have no way of verifying, no way of knowing, and no way of proving. Because the bottom line is the confidential private information for 113,000 voters was stolen between the period of September 19th and October 17th.
Wow.
They didn't even tell state legislators, who are the final constitutional authority on elections. They didn't even tell them until it printed in the paper. Like state legislators found out reading the news in the morning. Like
wow.
nobody was told of this or notified. And then when people were initially notified, they weren't told that it began in September 19th. So when you look at the significance of the data that was stolen, a hack on this magnitude, there's no way that you can affirmatively state who did it, because the people who have the technology to pull off an operation like this have the technology to conceal who did it and why. It was a foreign government, almost certainly. And the information that they stole, you're talking driver's license numbers, social security numbers, the type of information. I have a hard time believing that, say, for example, Russia or Iran would be stealing people's driver's license numbers so that they can, open up fraudulent loans and credit cards in their name. I don't know what their motivation would be, but what I do know is all of the information that they required is exactly the information that you need to request ballots by mail or email. And that is the only security measure that I'm aware of that's still in place, because all of the other ones have been removed over the years. And what I also know, well, go ahead.
It's a little kind of horse before the cart for them to send a letter then saying that, nothing happened with the information, and, we can verify that, when they really can't verify any of that because they have no idea what these people did with the information. To my knowledge, the FBI hasn't put out any report of what the these folks did with that information. And the timing of it is a little peculiar, that the hack was a week apart from the ballots, the deadline for the ballots, October 17th and October 24th. What could a person do with that type of information if they had it?
Well, they actually initially got their hands on that information a full month before the deadline. So if the Alaskan state government finally found a way to prove a negative, I would love to hear their scientific process, how they solved that paradox that nobody heretofore has in human history discovered, how you can prove a negative, that they can affirmatively state that this did not happen with no evidence to back that up. It's really amazing, that they managed to pull that off. But getting back on track, so they have that information. Nobody knows what was done with it, and the state, when we were doing requests for discovery requests, they were unwilling to answer any of our questions about who was affected, in reference to what were the names of people who were affected that cast absentee ballots. So I had no way of contacting those people to check and see whether or not they did vote. And the state flat out told us that nobody double voted, which is false. There's always people that double vote. And without that information, we can't know for sure what exactly happened, or if it's possible to see who was affected or not. I can say, though, that out of the roughly 4,000 absentee vote by mail ballots that were cast in this specific House race, 15%, or around 600 of them, were people that had never voted in the past 10 years.
Wow.
So
Oh.
it's entirely possible that those people voted legitimately. I'm sure most or all of them did. I have no way of verifying, though, whether or not they did. And theoretically, it would be very easy for somebody like me, who's working for a foreign government, who has access to all of this information, to figure out who those people are and then cast a ballot in their name without them ever even knowing what happened.
Right. Well, from what our team knows, we have 87 in that district that double voted. So we'll have to check into that a little bit more and find out who that was. 87 at minimum, evidently. So so people do double vote. We've seen that in other places. We certainly saw that up in Shungnak in 2016. And so essentially what we've got here now is we've got 2 days before the election, an important polling place gets moved. And we know that on election day, most of the voters that turned out were Republican voters on election day, because the Democrats had been told by their leaders and by their propaganda arm to vote absentee or vote by mail. They were told stay away from stay away from the polls. It's not safe to vote by absentee. So the big chase was on for their ballots, and they had outside people coming into the state scraping those ballots from throughout the neighborhoods, especially the low-hanging fruit neighborhoods. And this is a very blue district, quite honestly. But fascinating to me, I think Trump lost this district by like 600 votes. Dan Sullivan lost this district by like 500 votes. If I'm not mistaken, Don Young also lost. But Lance Pruitt, being a Republican, is really well liked in that district. He only lost by 11 votes. And so
Lance Pruitt outperformed every other Republican on the ballot by a lot.
Exactly. He really outperformed.
So the points to look at when we start talking about this polling place location being an issue, like first off, the point of our argument was the state did not follow legal statutory obligations. And as a result, the turnout was suppressed in that precinct, and that caused injury to Lance Pruitt. And really, this is not about Lance Pruitt. This is about the voters that live there. Right. The people that live there were disenfranchised by the action. And, this is a little bit more in my opinion land, but the will of the voters was unclear because of the actions of the state division of elections. They did not follow their statutory guidelines. So they had two basic arguments on their side. And the first one, they were saying, well, it's all because of coronavirus. And the reason, in my opinion, that doesn't hold water is because they had other precinct locations around the city of Anchorage, and one in this district. And the one in this district, Stuckagon Heights, they had the exact same issue, the exact same change in the location issue in the exact same time period, and they handled that one completely differently.
They sent out
handled it
postcards.
well. They sent out the updated cards notifying people in the mail. People were notified. They didn't have the same problems. And
Right.
they never offered an explanation of why that one was handled so dramatically different. And they didn't offer any kind of chat logs indicating like what those discussions were like and how or why that happened. And the other argument the state had, that it was almost unbelievable, but they started to actually offer arguments indicating that, well, people had opportunities to vote by mail. They should have just done it that way. And at one point, we had a witness that came in that was an actual disenfranchised voter, that she budgeted about an hour of her time to vote in the morning on election day. And then she was getting the runaround from, she showed up to a location, there's a sign on the door, she shows up to the next one, and she wasn't able to vote because of that. And the state's lawyer actually started to ask her questions like, well, why didn't you just give yourself more time? Like it was her fault that she didn't get to vote. And, the Lotsfeld's crew, like Matt Buxton is on Twitter, for example, making those arguments, the classic, well, if you didn't want it, why was your skirt so short kind of argument.
Exactly right.
And
very dangerous.
so it's kind of crazy. They were actually blaming the voters. And the thing that's so interesting about that is because the election day voters were overwhelmingly conservative, 2-1, the state's own arguments were prejudiced against election day voters.
Yeah.
And they were prejudiced against those conservative voters because they were conservative. So like the argument from the state itself demonstrated that there was injury through their actions to Lance Pruitt and to his voters.
Yeah. So this is fascinating. We've got at least two things, which is three things really. We've got a moved. They moved the polling location to a place that had never been before, and so those who had not budgeted enough time were chasing around looking for where they were supposed to go, and some of them may not have. And I understand that there was undervote by 57. 57 doesn't sound like a lot, but when you're in a race that you've only won by 11 votes. That's a lot. The second thing is we have people out of the district voting inside the district, and you have a pretty good list, you said, of several dozen of those that you know. And you know this because you have a background in real estate and you know how to research deeds and deed transfers, correct?
Yeah, and so the reason why it's so significant is because the group of people that were treated very harshly were 2-1 Republican, and the group of people that were treated very leniently and the rules were not applied to were 2-1 in favor of the Democrats. The people that were voting those absentee by mail ballots, it was about 65% Democrat in favor of.
And the signatures were, there were no signatures, and they were accepted at 99.63% of them were just simply accepted.
Yeah. So when I talk to normal people on the street, they have this idea in their mind that it's a very secure process. Mm-hmm. The only form, if you're listening to this and you take one thing away, learn this. Okay. The only form of security on the absentee by mail voting process is the application itself. There's no signature verification. And say, for example, if I live in a house with any number of other people, I can just go through their wallets, take their driver's license number, send the application in. And if it's returned back to the Division of Elections with any mark in the signature box and the postmark is on or before election day, they're counting it, period. Like there's no other security measure. There's no signature verification is conducted.
Right. And so basically all of those ballot applications that you see in the garbage cans at the post office or in an apartment building garbage can that is right next to the mail drop, people can scrape those up, apply for the ballots. They can also vote them as long as there's a mark there. This is also true when somebody votes with an online, like the online system. You just have to simply send in your request for a ballot on November 2nd. You'll get your ballot back, and as long as you printed it out and mailed it back in, you have to postmark it, mail it back in by the 3rd. you can have a number of them sent to your address. It's
Yeah, so
not
if you have and it gets a little bit fuzzy because I don't want to confuse this with it's really confusing. Like vote by mail and absentee by mail are very
Sure,
different
sure.
processes, and they sound very similar. But
Right.
when you're talking the absentee by mail that is done in our state elections in the fall, not the muni ones,
Mhm.
anyone who has access to, if you have your access to somebody's driver's license number or their last four or their voter number, which those are all considered confidential, and they're not readily available through normal means to the public. But if you have access to any one of those things, you can cast a ballot in somebody else's name, and it would never. There's no way of knowing that happened because there's no signature verification. But to get a little bit back on track to your original question, though, when I was looking at those 170 transactions, anybody can see the same information that I saw. You can see that the home was sold on Zillow. You can see through the property tax records that are publicly available that the occupant that had been there for years changed when the home was sold. And then you also can go on the DNR website and you can pull up the deed that was filed with the recorder's office, where it clearly states, like, I so and so am moving to this address and turning over this property to these other people. It says that on the deed. It's notarized. It's a legal document. They're surrendering their interest in that property and moving to another place. And a lot of these, they give follow-up addresses out of state even. And then when they voted in October, months down the line, the ballot was sent to, surprise, surprise, that out-of-state address. And then they voted full count in our local elections. And the judges are completely unwilling to look at this, even though this is something that very clearly is not in line with our state laws and our state statutes. I guess they want the legislature to come back and make it even more specifically around, this. I'm not sure what they want, to be honest. I guess there's in some way they want legislative action on this, but there was one other case, like we talked about, Liz Snyder's employee, her campaign staff that voted that way. I wanted to mention too that another one that really struck me as interesting was, there was a former state politician, Betty Davis. They're talking about renaming a local high school in her honor.
Yeah, they renamed East High School in the Betty Davis East High School.
Yeah, sad to say, she died earlier in the year, and her home was sold in an estate sale over the summer, and one of her descendants voted from that address in this November election, and it's somebody who lives in Indiana and who had the ballot sent to Indiana. And it's so crazy to me that this person who I don't know if she ever lived at that property or not, but it was sold in an estate sale. Like, the owner of that home was deceased, and the person that voted from that address doesn't even live in Alaska. They live out of state.
Be really interesting to see if she also votes in that state as well.
I did take a look at that, and I've got no indication that they did. And so I do want to say, like, all these people have a right to vote. It's a matter, though, of how their vote is counted. Like, I can't say that they don't have an interest in the state of Alaska, that they're not residents, but I can say that they're not local residents. If anything, it should be a statewide count only. And for people who are honest on their registration, who do update it in time, that is how those people are voting. If you're honest, you don't get the same treatment as if you're slow or
or dishonest in some cases, where they just they're working on the campaign, or they're extremely invested in the campaign. Maybe they are personal friends, and they just find a way to vote in that district, and that are things are just maybe wired a little too loosely. We have a no excuse state. Well, you're able to vote in any way you want. You can vote in person, absentee by mail. You can vote by online. And personal representative ballot, the P ballots. So we have a number of ways that people can vote legally, but what we're finding is that people are so eager to influence elections that some of them may be voting illegally intentionally. Now, you're not the one who's saying that. I am.
Yeah, and on that note, a lot of people right now are very interested in, a lot of people are very concerned about the integrity in our elections and security in our elections. And I will say from my experience, from as being somebody who personally has been down at division of elections while they're handling the ballots, while they're deciding which ones to count and how to count them. And also, in this race, people were concerned about the machines, but all of the races, all of the 9,000 plus ballots that were cast in Lance Pruitt's race were taken out by hand and looked at by humans and verified in that recount. It was a hand recount, and it was done with our observers there. And it was found to be done fairly well with a high degree of integrity. What I will say, the way that I've seen election fraud happen, it's not like a planned or coordinated or conspiratorial thing for the most part. What you see is over many years, many different politicians and bureaucrats and people behind the scenes at the Division of Elections, they just slowly remove all of the security measures one by one. Everything just kind of becomes very soft and squishy. And eventually you just wake up one day and there's almost no security left at all. And then just organically, there's all of these irregularities that happen.
Yeah.
And they cause issues in our elections that make it so it's unclear, what the voter intent was and whether or not a win is legitimate. It's a matter of, a lot of people, like a lot of my left-winger friends, they might say like, well, you can't prove that voter fraud happened, like as if there's some mustachioed villain with a mask on in the back room with a box of ballots like, I'm stealing the election. It doesn't happen that way. You remove every security measure and just organically, one person here, one person there, like 200 people there, just decide that they're going to request a ballot on behalf of their son who's in college out of state, or they're going to vote this ballot that their disabled grandmother who has Alzheimer's is entitled to, that she doesn't want to vote. It's just all of a bunch of individuals are able to exploit the system on their own. It's completely untraceable, and it's just something that happens organically out in the ether because all of the security measures have been reduced and removed.
And because we have people like, groups like the ACLU just suing at every turn to try to remove those security measures and saying that we're somehow robbing people the right to vote just because we ask them to show ID. So John, do you have any thoughts about this as well? Because you've been quiet.
Yeah, I just want to, thanks so much, Jay. I love your insight, great research. And I do just want to say to our listeners, there is still hope. There is still power of the people. And I want to give a prime example of this. Here on the Kenai Peninsula Borough Assembly thought that they knew best, and they were going to move to all mail-in ballot elections. And despite overwhelmingly critical response from all the testimony that said, please do not do this, they passed it. And myself and some others, led by Assemblymember Norm Blankley, basically said, hold my beer. And it took us about 15 minutes to get 1,500 signatures to say, we're going to put this on the ballot, because we don't think moving to all mail-in ballot elections on the Kenai Peninsula Borough is the right thing to do. And even though the Assembly always thinks that they're smarter than everybody else, we said, we want this on the ballot. And we got it shot down. So our measure passed by a 70% margin. And so we did not move to all mail-in ballots on the Kenai Peninsula Borough because people stood up for what they thought was right. So if you're listening to this, I want to encourage you that you can stand up. You can call the division election. You can do public information requests. You can phone your legislator and ask how you can help shore up to make sure that this doesn't happen again. Sitting and doing nothing will accomplish nothing, but getting off your seat like Jay has to do something about this will actually do something about this. So
yeah, no, that's a really good point. And Jay, I really want to thank you for being on the show today. You have been a fascinating guest. I've learned so much today that I didn't know about these changes in D20 District 27. And you've really enlightened us a lot. We're going to have you back on in a few weeks to explain to us sort of where things are at and give us an update on it. And thank you for your time today.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Very good. And John, before we go, did you give away some of those books last week? I wanted to hear all about how that contest went. We were giving away the copies of Triggered, and they were like signed copies or something, right?
Yes, Left Privilege by Donald Trump Jr. A signed copy. So a gentleman named Aaron, he just wanted to give his first name, ended up winning. So he was very excited. He emailed me today and he said, listen, I basically never won any of these things. He's done these not only with us, but probably throughout his life on Facebook or whatever. And this is the first time he's ever won something. So he's very, very, very excited. We're going to be sending him a signed copy of Left Privilege by Donald Trump Jr. And we'll send him some Must Read Alaska swag as well. So he's pretty excited guy.
Excellent. Well, I look forward to hearing your next promotion because we're going to do this again. That was a lot of fun. Hey, and by the way, I love working with you. I love working with you, Scott, as well. If you're a supporter of Must Read Alaska, thank you so much. Thanks for listening today and for making it possible for us to stand up for the right side of the news and against the blue wave of the liberal activist media. Until next week, we're signing off from somewhere in Alaska. See you maybe on Wednesday right here on Must Read Alaska.